Hello everyone, welcome to UMD Media. UMD Media strives to work on understanding, measuring, and doing. And it works for evidence-based discourse and decision-making, focusing on Ethiopia and the Horn. And today we'll be talking about on the same subject we have been covering on Quo Vadis, Ethiopia. And for those who are following us on Twitter, on YouTube, and Facebook, please share, like, and if you haven't subscribed, subscribe so that many people can reach this content. It's my great pleasure to invite and to have as a guest today Faisal Roble from California to talk about Quo Vadis, Ethiopia. Welcome to UMD Media Show, Faisal.
Thank you very much, Getachew. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Today we'll be talking about Quo Vadis, Ethiopia, and in a larger context, the Horn of Africa. I am confident to say that you are well versed in the Horn, in issues, actors, partners, and historical yesterday, today. Perhaps we might also be able to talk about the future. So first, the usual, what I do is I'll be introducing, for those who would be interested to go further in terms of engaging and communicating with you. This is Faisal Roble on Twitter, very active, expressing, sharing ideas, and so on. The same on LinkedIn. For those who are active in LinkedIn, you would find Faisal Roble there too. And this is your bio, very brief bio. But I want to share, for those who are maybe seeing and listening, watching what you do, this very short video that would tell who Faisal Roble is.
I've been with the planning department for the last 30 years. Planning is a lot to me. It is a place where I have witnessed the changing of a great city from a sprawled city into more of a livable, dense city. It is a city that has grown into a sustainable city with pedestrian amenities. The most important thing in planning is to really create a livable space where people can interact. It's because, first of all, this city is a very diverse city. It's also a growing city that attracts a lot of people. So the challenge we face is to align demography with geography. And for that demography, we have to create both housing and places to shop and play. My name is Faisal Roble, and I'm a principal city planner.
Great. With this, what I see is a man who knows very well LA as a planner, working for 30 years plus, a man who knows Mogadishu very well, a man who knows Tigray very well. So my first soft question would be, what does it mean to be a principal planner for one of the greatest cities in the world and dealing with equitable, livable city, at the same time, write in a great way the complex issues, variables we have in the Horn? How does that look like?
Yes, Getachew, thank you very much. I think that's nobody ever asked me of all the interviews that I've been doing for the years. But in a sense, it explains who I am and what I do and why I do. Coming from Jigjiga and growing up in that third world backwater of the periphery regions of Ethiopia and then going to Mogadishu and finally ending up in Los Angeles as the first batch of refugees coming from the Horn of Africa in 1981, where I was a roommate of a Tigray, an Eritrean, an Oromo, and an Amara, because we all came together 1981. From there on to my current situation, I have double personality, if you will, or two persons in one. On the one hand, I see myself as a person of the Horn of Africa, but at the same time, I see myself as a citizen of the world, in the sense that LA is home to me as much as Jigjiga is, as much as Mogadishu is. So when I view issues politically, socially, culturally, I look at it not from the narrow viewpoint of my upbringing in Jigjiga, but I look issues from being a person of the Horn, but at the same time a person of California and Los Angeles, therefore a citizen of the world. So you will always hear me comparing my experience as a person from the Horn to that of the Black Americans in Los Angeles and in America and in North America, because my sense of freedom and my sense of equity, whether it is at the professional level, at transportation level, at housing level, and at the level of self-determination for me and for my people, is usually advised not only by the experience of the Horn of Africa and its people, but by the worldwide people that we all lived together with, whether you are, whom you live with and where you are or where I am. So the issues that I really face both in Los Angeles, but at the same time glean back home, are mainly informed by my experience from my upbringing to where I am today at this age and at this professional level. So, yeah, I come from that point of view. Thank you for asking that question.
Great. Yes, your profile is very rich in terms of not only the professional platform, even in the political engagement. You have been actively sharing. I mean, they get ready for this show. I had to plow through years of writing, sharing, and so on. Sometimes I was wondering, is this your full-time job or something that you do, during your spare time? You can, share that when you answer my next question. So my next question is, given that you have been writing, sharing, you are also part of an active engagement politically at one point, and you have been, like you said, from roommates to sharing, writing platforms, sitting in halls. I would say, the many current actors of Ethiopian politics and in general the Horn. So, because our topic is Quo Vadis Ethiopia or Quo Vadis the Horn of Africa, what is Roble's Faisal's assessment where Ethiopia is, where the Horn of Africa is as we speak now?
Great. I think we are at the apex, at the pedestal of getting to full liberation for our people in the Horn of Africa. I think we have seen an era of empire and imperial rule. We have seen a form of dictator for about 30 years. We have seen a reformist APRDF that turned it again into more corrupt, although the system continued. Instead of really taking the final step to see Ethiopia moving toward this democratic federal system, i.e., people ruling locally but sharing something at the federal level, I am dismayed to say that we have walked back, even went back where EPRDF took the country, and today we are in parallel with where the Derg really wanted Ethiopia to be taken. Local nationalism of one ethnic group that has dominated the Ethiopian empire scene is Menelik won over Tedros and Yohannes of Tigray, which really created a pivot for Menelik to finally control Tigray and the Amara region, and at the same time come down to the Oromo and Somali. It looks like the current administration in Ethiopia longs for that imperial, one dominant culture type. And that's really the sad story. Instead of moving forward and taking 2 more steps to get to a full federal democratic system, whatever happened to the current administration is philosophy and ideology. They somehow felt safe and more secure in going back. And as an analyst and as a person who knows that region very well, that would lead us into a bad bloodshed whose beginning started in Tigray and it started in an ugly form. But I don't think unless a solution and an inclusive system comes out of this, I think Tigray's experience would not be the last, it would be the beginning of a dark cloud finally descending on us. And I'm not optimistic at this particular time. However, you never give up because we have seen historically for the last 150 years so many things to change. 1991, when the EPRDF walked in, there was tremendous optimism. I went down there in 1992 and spent 4 months in Addis and all the way to Jijiga. I think the optimism was great, and that continued for a while. And some mistakes have happened, but still, the intent to make Ethiopia a federal system was still there. I hope we don't come back to that, but at what we are today, maybe we'll go into the detail. We are in a bad shape.
You know, it attracted my attention when you specifically say they feel safe, secured to go back. That I think is something that is worth depending, because the whole idea with the MD media is understanding. So help us understand what you're referring in that, feeling secure, because I can clearly see that there are even parties that just, their platform is going back to the very good days of Ethiopia, specifically 40 years back. They specifically say that, and they are the third largest party, I mean, explicitly said. Then we'll talk about those who don't say it explicitly, but working on that. But Faisal, what do you mean by feeling secured and safe?
So basically, there is this school of thought in Ethiopia, which is now also getting a foothold in the palace, the Menelik Palace, and the ruling corridors of Addis Ababa, that really believes that in the last 30 years, what has been happening in Ethiopia is not a desirable condition for the Ethiopia that some gurus want to maintain. The type of Ethiopia where some histories were buried at the expense of others, where what Black Americans call critical asset, meaning soft power that comes from culture and language dominance given to certain people at the expense of others, where somebody who comes from the Amara region for the last 100 years had extra power on the Somali, on the Oromo, for that matter, on the Tigray and others. Some people think that's the best Ethiopia. Others who come from the peripheries think that they have never really endorsed that image of Ethiopia. They were just subjects of an imposition that came from above, and they struggled to change that. And as you know, that struggle started in the 40s with Tigray, with my area. 48 was the first time that this struggle started. to change and equalize Ethiopia. In the 60s, we were very lucky that a progressive young Amhara Tigrayans and Oromos, particularly around the Addis Ababa University, really had excellent progressive value that did not 100% understand the experience of, say, the South, but could read and interpret based on the experiences of the rest of the world and created a linkage between the North and the South to create and struggle for a common agenda. That's how the whole Ethiopian student movement started. Today, unfortunately, we see some of those even leaders at that time who were proponents of the creation of a linkage between the South and the North through the means of struggle, went back and literally renounced their own history. You know, Alfred Aldrich Cleaver, who was a Black American, very vocal Black Panther Party member, changed identity and later on became very conservative. And he went as far as criticizing his own book, Soul on Ice, which was a very strong Black Panther Party articulation and their philosophy. He went and criticized his own book. Today, among some elites within the Ethiopian society, you hear people who were at the vanguard of the change of Ethiopia, a democratic Ethiopia where self-determination, including if some people decide to secede but still maintain some sort of relationship with their brothers in the north or the south, whatever. Those very elements who coined that phrase, who struggled with that idea, are today on the right side, criticizing and destroying that concept. So the sad story is not what we experience today, it's how far we went back, how we worked on our own values. And today, there is no ideology. In the 60s and 70s, especially within the elite, we had an ideology that united us. And that ideology called for equitable access to the system of governance in Ethiopia. That really gave us hope. That hope is dashed today. When you see especially elites from the Amhara endorsing some of the elements that were leaders during the Red Terror. I will not name names, but that is really where I feel the let down. And we don't have anything to fall back unless we bring something new.
Mm-hmm. That's great. You mentioned about the elite and some characters in that. One way of, in my view, one way of understanding where we are, where we came from, maybe where we might be heading, depending on what we do or we don't, is maybe looking at some characters. So these public figures, for example, talking about the prime minister. This is actually how, if you remember, how I jumped in and asked you if we can converse on this. This is from May 16, when you are talking about how Ethiopia has seen it in terms of kings, dictators, autocrats, and so on, a long history of that. And you are talking about the prime minister, a combination, a soup of all these, in the same bowl, so to speak. Can you speak to that? Because again, it's about understanding where we are heading.
So I am a avid reader of political science books, and one of my favorite book is this book written in 1984 when I was at UCLA by two UC Berkeley professors, Jackson and Carlsberg, and the book's called it Personal Rule in Black Africa. So they give you 4 typologies of the type of African rulers at that time. That's the era Mengistu was there, Ziad Barre was there, and the Horn of Africa was at the apex of Cold War. So they took people like Nyerere as a princely prophet type ruler. People like Barre were dictators. Then there are autocrats. Then you have kings. In Abiy, you have really the dream of being a king, the seventh king that he really believes. He also sees himself as a theologian, somebody whose inspiration is come from the Bible, not from the policy books, from the Bible. When you read his Medammar, he literally trashes away the Western philosophies that is a collection of human thoughts. It could be predominantly Western, but it is a collection of human thoughts that goes back all the way to philosophies, people like Voltaire, and all the way up back to Lenin and Marx and even Durkheim and Weber and all that. That is what's called Western intellectual philosophy. And Africans added later on, people like Nkrumah and what have you. Abiy gets up from nowhere and says, all those are trash. I have my own philosophy called Medammar, and that's the only way Ethiopia can move. That is really, in a sense, a theologian kind of approach. Then autocracy is also another main character of Abiy. For instance, he has a very small circle with whom he shares decisions. Some of his generals didn't even have an inkling when he was taking war on Tigray. A lot of the things that he does is by himself. You recall when he collected the money, that donation for one of the parks, and he said nobody can ask him or audit him. Those are, with autocracy, that book tells you that autocrats don't rule usually through a larger system. They rule things with a smaller venue that he can always dictate and manipulate. So in Abiy, we see really a combined personality or way of thinking that includes, theology, that includes kingly philosophy, that includes autocracy. And for the first time, for somebody like that to run a country of 110 million, the second most populous country in Africa, lends you danger looming large.
Very interesting account of this combination or combined personality in the same person and leading, a populous country. And again, talking about Abiy, the last 200 days, actually, to be exact, it's 199 days since the war on Tigray started on November 4th, when we do this show. So you have been writing, at least in Twitter, from day one, I would say, where this is heading, the scale, the magnitude, and so on. I might be sharing some of them to our viewers. But at the same time, again, coming back to LA, when we talk about a principal planner, I read somewhere this is the first black to be in that position. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is another aspect to that. Recently, you have been appointed as the racial equity officer as well. So just a very short clip there.
As the Chief Equity Officer for the City of Los Angeles, the largest department in the country, it is a very challenging assignment given the history of zoning in the United States. Los Angeles has played a significant role in pioneering the drafting and adapting zoning in the 1920s. That's exactly the same time blacks were leaving the South, moving to the North for industrial jobs. And what had happened is that the zoning that was practiced at the time did not really anticipate nor work it or give blacks and people of color the amenities that they wanted in their neighborhoods.
as a result of zoning, after a few years of looking backwards, we have Los Angeles City as one of the first cities in the nation to have adopted zoning, have resulted in neighborhoods that are unequal. Some neighborhoods are well planned, others have not been, and that is the challenge. At the wake of the murder of George Floyd in May 2020, Mayor Garcetti was one of the first elected officials in the country to react to that incident and right away issued Executive Directive number 27, which ordered all departments to come up with an action plan to address racial justice and equity in the city. We recognized that for many, many years, the neighborhoods occupied by Blacks and people of color did not have enough access to groceries that dispense. They did not have enough medical facilities in their neighborhoods. So all the shortages, if you will, have finally contributed to the issues that we have seen with COVID-19 and attacking people of color in a very disproportionate number. So I think planning will have its work cut out, but it would require also the collaboration of many key departments in the city.
It's, for me, you do this on your day job, identity based, all that, issues you want to address in this great city. And then you go home and you write, about massacres down there. This is from 2017. And you see today you're tweeting and sharing your ideas about Tigray and so on. So again, it's related to my first question, but with these two, day job, full-time work on making, improving, and then you see genocide happening in the country you come from, I come from. What does that say to you, and what is your reading specifically vis-a-vis how the elite is handling this back home?
Yeah. Itacho, as you noticed, whether I'm working on planning or writing, there is a theme that runs through my work, whether my day work or my intellectual work, and that is the issue of representing the downtrodden, to speak for the ones who are left out, whether that is in terms of social, political, economic programs, because some of us choose in life to really be, for the lack of a better word, to the left of the middle, progressive, if you will. Some of us, this is a choice, the same way others choose. So I think when I speak about what's happening in Tigray, a lot of people probably would see this as to, why does somebody like me care about what's happening in Tigray, or for that matter, in the Gumuz region? But in addition to, as you say, being the place where we came from, also there is that, issue of commitment to defending the right of the little guy, whether you are in Canada or in America, or, so with that philosophy, it gives me really the added energy to use at least 17, 18 hours of the 24 hours that we have during the day. And most of the work that I do, politically, socially, is when I leave my job, and instead of going to bars or some places, that's where I do reading and then pick up the pen and write. And I usually like to write on issues that really touch me. That could be something happening in Tigray. And honestly speaking, Ethiopians should not and need not pass easily and lightly on what happened in Tigray. I tell you one thing, I was one of the vocal people who were opposing EPRDF all the way back from 1992. One of my most well-read pieces were when I argued and forecasted that EPRDF was establishing a one-party rule system, which was introduced to Africa by Museveni, who says that people can have different viewpoints inside, but they have to belong in one. And I think that idea was also strengthened by a project the USAID gave to Samuel Huntington, who went to Addis and advised the EPRDF leadership for 2 weeks. And the booklet that came out said in order to maintain the peasant revolution in Ethiopia, since you don't have a working class or a democratic middle class, that's why maintain the revolution through the one-party rule. That's the same path now PP is taking. What that philosophy says is, keep the power in one group and let the others be just singers on the side. So my writings go all the way there and always represented for the groups that really, were crying. So most people get confused between their position is against TPLF versus the positions of what's happening to the nation of Tigray, 6 million plus people who literally came close to genocide and still ethnic cleansing going on. Getachew, I'll tell you, I think I posted in my page 2018 when Isaias was coming to Addis. I was staying at the Radisson Hotel by Pole Airport, and I was literally watching everything. I wrote some notes that day, but traveling to Kenya, June 2018, after I left Addis, I was sitting next to a young Tigranian lady who was a doctor, MD. She was going to South Africa for a training, and we talked. And she told me that she was a doctor in Dagahpur. That's where Mustafa of the Somali region president is born in Kamis. We talked. It was then, I'm talking about 2018, June. It was then that she explained to me all the insecurity that she was facing and her family was facing. People think that things happened on November 4th. That was the build up and the climax. I think I posted in 2018 at that time, my conversation with that young lady, although I hid her name. And she was telling me how her parents may not feel safe in Addis Ababa. I know the Tigray community knew then, but they were just biting their teeth to hold on until it exploded in their face. From there on, it's just a question of narrative. What happened from November after the build-up? Rape is something that Ethiopian history never seen. Massacre, killing, destroying religious relics and civilizations. This is something. I mean, many things happened in my own region during EPRDF. Some bad things happened that are also written very well. But this one, at this particular time, with Abiy calling for peace, getting the Nobel Peace, and targeting the region that he just felt to be in opposition to his power, is something that will stay in the Ethiopian history the same way the history of the Zaman Masafint, the Dark Ages, stayed in Ethiopian history. Where this will take us, I'm not sure. So with the elites, they can deny as much as they want. I mean, a lot of ethnic cleansings or genocides have been denied. They can deny, but I think one thing that you cannot deny is the story of the victim. You can never stop the story of the victim. Talk to Somalis. They remember their victimhood all the way from 1920 when a British explorer called Major Jeremy, I wrote several times on his name, traveled and literally documents piece by piece what the settlers were doing to the Somalis, all the way to 2010 when the Galub Station area, the ONLF ambushed the Chinese and what happened after that, the blockade and what have you. Till today, you don't hear the narrative or you don't seek the true story from the ones who perpetrated. You seek the true story from the victims. So when I hear people of some stations that are sympathetic to the government completely trying to whitewash and even blaming what's happening now in all the investigations to American journalists, to the New York Times, to the US Congress, I just laugh at them because I don't care what the US feels or how it does. What is important is what the Tigray guy says, what the lady who said that 14 men raped in daylight. That's the story that will end up in history. And who writes that history? Not the government. That history is written by the very people who pass through oral as well as written to their children. So I started when we were talking informally how they're wasting our time. I think people who are trying to create a false narrative of the very thing that we see in our eyes are just wasting their time and our time and probably even putting Ethiopia on a more dangerous road instead of atonement, instead of working towards some sort of resolution, including bringing TPLF to the table. Whether they will forgive what happened or not, that's another story. But if you really want to talk to what happened to Tigray, you cannot wish away TPLF. If you want to talk about Somalis and what happened, you cannot wish away ONLF. They may be sitting low now, but they have stories to tell then and now. So I think the same in the Black American history, there is a tradition that says sunrise to sunset. Sunrise is when they were slaves and they used to work for the master, and they will make sure that they articulate whatever the master wants to hear. That's during the daytime when they're in the plantation. Sunset is when they go to their cabins and they make their true history. That's how they survived. Their music, their stories about Africa, that's the true Black American tradition. And that's the one that's sustaining them today. That's why you don't hear Black American is often magnifying George Washington or this, but they talk about it. The same with us. They can write whatever they want, but Tigray will always narrate its history the way they see today. Somalis will narrate their history the way they see today. The arrest of Jawar will be the same as what has been done in the 1960s to the Tadesse Birru of the self-help program within a short period of time, but no Oromo can afford to forget that. The others may not forget that, but any Oromo who writes a book or a thesis will always hanker back to that. The point here is that Addis Ababa cannot tell anybody of the 110 million people how to write their history. We write our history when we are at our homes, when we are talking to our kids and our family members. And that's how that history is sustained.
Very interesting. Even in your all writings, a theme that a golden thread I would call that goes through is narratives, storytelling. You are a very good storyteller, I must say. And talking about stories, even now, you're mentioning that, yes, they can have their own version, but at the end of the day, it's the victim's version that would sustain and so on. Talking about that, this is from this week. This picture is from this week, Ethiopia week, and you could see behind the prime minister, everyone, from the regional states and so on. So in one of your tweets, you mentioned about how Abiy changed, the leadership. I mean, this is supposed to be a federation, and he's supposed to be, leaving the states alone, and then, the shared rule that you are talking about. So we see one of the figures behind him is Mustafa. So again, is it right for Tigrayans, people of Tigray. We're not talking about the PLF. We're talking about the people to expect, when Abiy was trumping everyone and then, going after Tigray with this scale of war involving Eritrea and other forces. Actually, parents of Somalia, unlike Ethiopian parents and Eritrean parents, they didn't keep quiet. They are, voicing where are our kids and so on, in terms of the involvement in Tigray. So, Faisal, I'm just wondering, what is your take on how you see the expectation Tigray had on other regions like Somalia, for example, or Oromia, to say, no, this federation is in danger. It's going, in a slippery slope and so on. So that didn't happen.
Yeah.
What is your assessment on that?
Well, so although they all are in the federation system, there are different levels of growth and consciousness. In political economy, we have the uneven development that I was even talking in the LA context. It can be in one setting, but the level of development would be different politically, socially, economically. I think Oromo and Tigray region are a bit more developed politically than, say, the Somali region. And as you know, all of the leadership that are now members of the federal state are installed by Abiy. He's having a difficulty to really install one that could listen to him for the Tigray region, not because of the war. That's also one factor. But I think Tigray and TPLF had a little stronger consciousness when it comes to what is involved in the changes that are taking place. In the Somali, we are, I think, at the lowest level in terms of the consciousness. For whatever reason, it could be that they were never integrated into the body politic of Ethiopia, that they were at one time seen even aliens in their own land, which is the period when I grew up there, that they were not even considered part of Ethiopian citizenship. I think the Oromo is the elephant in the house, the giant that's now waking up. And to the credit of the Oromo intellectuals and activists, they really completely succeeded to disassemble the Tigranya cause from TPLF, whom they had some issues, but at the same time willing to forgive and work together to address their challenges. I think in the Somali region, because of the fact that the level of political engagement is low, very low, the very fact that everything that moves is controlled through the clan system, which later on caters to the needs of the state. In the way that, for example, if one intellectual comes to oppose the local government, and for that matter, the federal government, basically that entire clan can be shut off, even from the share of being represented at the parliament. So basically, the terror in which Somalis are is qualitatively different than the one you see in Tigray, where the massive open conflict and killing and rape is happening. But there is a psychological terror in the Somali region that impacts the person, the immediate family, and the global clan family that someone has, whereby they will lose all benefits, including, by the way, the share of development projects that the region may have, such as schools, water sources, hospitals. So if you are labeled as an opposition clan, you can be starved from all that. I think if the top was democratic, if Abiy wanted to structure a federal leadership that is democratic, they could have had that. But basically, because the top leadership doesn't see democracy as its goal at this point in time, but autocracy at its way to rule the country, then with autocracy, you need people who would enforce that autocratic nature throughout the country. So everything else now in the country is ignored. What is being emphasized is to make sure that Abiy's system of autocracy filters through the entire country. I was listening last night a debate between the Somali regional president and two others, one from the Amara, and I even posted something where I was really shocked to hear my friend Mustafa to argue that there is no ideology Ethiopia can use to progress except Medemmer. I mean, I can expect some average person, but some people who claim to be learned to say that. And this is not the first time I hear from somebody like him. I also heard similar things from Burhanu Naga, who could be the teacher of Abiy himself. But now even some writings coming out from the woods where Burhanu Naga was even in communication with Dr. Abiy when Medemmer was writing. And I think the intellectual fallacy for me is how can you write a new philosophy and not endorse all the philosophies that have been coming down for the last 400 years, 500 years. So I think what we see is a narrower autocratic system to be built in Ethiopia, probably never seen in the past. And with Abiy's paranoia around power, Getachew, we could be seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of where Ethiopia is headed. We don't see, especially my fear is after the election, where he will think that he finally bought legitimacy, and every regional president that you see will also claim now they have been elected. Then the little room that people had before the election could be closing down. And that could put us on a pathway for another 5 years of tight grip of power by this group, and that will impact all the way from Addis to the regions, and that's very dangerous.
Very gruesome reality, indeed. But you saw this coming in a way, right? This is from 2018. You were in a hall with one of now very close allies, if not advisor, of the Prime Minister, Andargacho Zege. And for a man who is for self-rule and at the same time the shared rule structure, you saw that already in 2018. This is September 25, 2018, written by you. And actually, this is the screen is showing a different one. I'm talking about this one, August 12, 2018. And you have a sober ending to this article where you talk about the self-determination. This is about Article 39, which many, in the periphery, in the historical periphery, and who were fighting and advocating for self-determination, thought it would be a guarantee. So he boldly already then talks about how Abiy and Lemma, would be the first people to just throw this into the trash bin. And you expressed your personal emotion, feeling at that time where we were heading at the country. Can you speak to that and relate it? And you ask in one of your tweets, where is the Abiy of 2018?
Yes. So I wrote this after I returned from that trip to Kenya in Addis Ababa 2018. And in July 2018, I gave an interview to the BBC Somali program after I listened to several speeches that Abiy gave, where I came to the conclusion that A, he was not a democratic person, B, he was getting his inspiration not from public policy books, but from the Bible, and that has its danger, and C, from his speech of Pax Ethiopiana, Ethiopian exceptionalism, what in Amharic they call it, the Ethiopian Fitsuminat and Nat. I literally saw Abiy, somebody who will travel on a road that is very dangerous, that was not consistent with federalism and Article 39. So when I came back, I assessed and I finally wrote that, where I completely argued that soon or later, Abiy will try to create pact with the forces that oppose the Ethiopian guarantee for the right of self-determination up to secession, knowing that the condition is placed for a secession is so high. In planning and environmental rule, we call it threshold. Threshold is the place that you cannot reach, and if you reach, you have to bring so much evidence. So the threshold established for a complete successful secession under Article 39 is very heavy and very high. Very rarely can anybody satisfy. However, the framers of the Constitution put it so that it guarantees those nations who were oppressed something to hold on to if they want to initiate challenge to the rule of the federal government and the heavy hand of the federal government. It was also a way to arrest and tell the federal government, be careful, you have limitations in terms of interfering in the local affairs of the region. That was the whole, reason why Tigray said, we still respect Addis Ababa, we still pay homage to the federal constitution and the federal government, but as a state, we have the right to hold election. The election of the states are enshrined in the federal constitution. The federal government can only make sure that civil rights and human rights are carried out during the election, and that the regional state doesn't manipulate the election process. Outside that, the timing, the resources, the management of the local election is 100% in the hands of the local administration. That's why even at the time of the argument, I came out openly and supported TPLF's decision to make its election. If Abiy didn't have ulterior motives, he could have sat down with them and say, we are having observers, we make sure that the process goes on. It's just like California, or Calgary, or any state having a selection. The federal regulation needs to be respected. It has to be fair and free. But in terms of management, and even what happens if a state wants to conduct an extraordinary election outside the 4 years, the federal government can. So we personally, I knew that the federal government was just using the election issue as a way to crack down and start the war. I'm even very skeptical of the accusations of the North Command and how it has been put by Addis Ababa in terms of who killed what and what happened. I hear some people saying that the federal government needs to create a narrative where they show videos and this and that to show that TPLF also committed, this kind of massacre. But to be honest with you, if they had it, they would have done it. These guys will not hold back. It's a controversial issue. And so basically what we see here is a federal system that's dying.
One thing that, again, in your writing about these narratives and so on, there is a huge disagreement on what Ethiopia is. Not only that, but what Ethiopia was. So for some, especially, we are not talking about the mass, whether it's Amhara, Somali, Tigray, Oromo. The masses are always united in suffering, I would call it. And but the elites, they change. Specifically, the change I see now the last 3 years is, overnight they change the narrative, right? So one thing that I want to play, maybe the background to my next question, is the speech by just a very short one that by Mustafa.
አነቶም ደማቅ አቀባበል የተደረገላቸው የሶማሌ ክልላዊ መንግስት ፕሬዝዳንት አቶ ሙስጠፋ ዑመር የሀሳባቸውን ጥራትና ከፍታ የሚያሳይ ሊጎብኙት የሄዱትንም ህዝብ የሚመጥን ምርጥ ንግግር አድርጓል። የሚያምኑበትን ከመናገር አንድም ጊዜ ወደ ኋላ ብለው የማያውቁት የምስራቁ ፈርጥ ሙስጠፋ እንዲህ አሉ።
አገራችን ኢትዮጵያ የቀደምት ስልጣኔ ባለቤት፣ የሰው ልጅ መገኛ፣ አያሌ ህብረ ብሔራዊ ባህልና እሴት ያላት የነጻነት ፈርጥ የሆነች የጥበበኛ ህዝቦች ሀገር ናት። በሂደት ከነበርንበት የስልጣኔ ማማ እና ዓለም ከሚያውቀን ታላቅነት ወርደን የዓለም የስልጣኔ ጭራ የድህነትና ኋላቀርነት ተራ የተሰለፍንበት አያሌ መነሻ ምክንያቶች ቢኖሩም ሁሉም የሚያግባባው ጉዳይ ግን በትምህርት መዳከማችን ምክንያት እንደሆነ ግልጽ ነው። ከዚህ ውርደት መላቀቂያው ብቻ
just I'm playing this when he tries to boil down the problem that brought down the country from its great times and so on, his education and so on. I can understand he's making that speech in a university graduation, but I can play a number of videos, clips and so on where people in the leadership around Abiy, they change the narrative, what Ethiopia was, where Ethiopia is heading, including the Madammer concept you were mentioning. So my question to you is, given what we discussed, we're almost 1 hour of conversation now. So given what we have been discussing, where do you see Ethiopia heading? The Ethiopia that recently silenced its patriarch from speaking about Tigray genocide, the Ethiopia that is, lost a significant part of its land to Sudan, but just, took it as any day. The Ethiopia that invited Eritrea or was denying it, but was forced to admit it and so on. So where is it heading? And specifically, I want to hear what your perspective is where Tigray is heading, given what has been happening, and we are in the 200 days mark.
Yes, good. That speech that you heard has no connection with the soul of the Somali. So I'll leave it there. It has no relationship with the psyche, history, persona of the Somali person, educated or not educated. So it's an unfortunate speech. And I think Mustafa is walking back on that. If you just listen to his last debate against the Amara National Movement person. With the Ethiopia inviting Eritrea to invade and kill Tigrayans or Tigrawa, it would be one of the unique historical experiences the Horn has seen. Not too long ago, TPLF was chastised by Ethiopian nationalists for giving Eritrea the right to practice its self-determination. Actually, the biggest anger they had against Mala Zenawi was because of his acceptance of Eritrea to exercise its rights. Now for the same people to come and dance for Eritrea over its crimes against the people of Tigray is again some history that we cannot explain now. But I think the more we learn and the more we understand why Abiy did this, the more we'll get answers. Up to now, it's a situation which forces you to put your 2 hands on your cheeks and keep wondering what happened. I cannot explain. What I can explain, at the risk of being wrong, is that Isaias doesn't have the same motives that Abiy has. Maybe you can talk about that some other time. I don't believe Isaias would leave Ethiopia or Tigray with the order of Abiy. Abiy to Isaias is a young, innocent, ignorant man. That's how Isaias thinks. If you heard their explanations, they are all over the world map. They say we invited. They say Tigray attacked Asmara. They say they came on their own. Abiy said himself that he invited because he couldn't defend because of the weakness of his army. It is a leadership that has really lost what is the essence of being a leader, responsibility to his own people. You can hate TPLF, you can hate anybody you want. Those are parties and fronts. They're not the people. But for Abiy not to know the history, the relationship between Eritrea and Ethiopia, and the complexity of some of the Ethiopians still hanging on to Asab. Asab is Afar, Afar is Ethiopia. I mean, I know all the slogans. So Abiy, history will not be kind to Abiy, no matter what. Whether he wins the war or he loses the war, he made some historical judgments that will haunt him forever. Ethiopia is nothing but the last living empire in the world. As I argued at the Oromo Studies Conference not too long ago, colonialism or colonial powers need not be Europeans. There are non-European colonial powers such as Tigray, Japan, and what have you. Ethiopia is the only known African colonial power whose time has elapsed. So our struggle is how should we reform Ethiopia, reformat, because the old format is not working. That's a passé. It's too old, and we don't have the formula. And Abiy is not the right agent to really move Ethiopia from an empire to a democratic federal. I think the EPRDF tried, but they didn't take it where we wanted. So the struggle would be whether Ethiopia would walk back to an empire, which is impossible because history never walks back, but would it withstand the challenges and the heavy weight of post-imperial Ethiopia? And that's one thing we don't know. Will that result in a federal system that's democratic, a disparate groups that joins in a commonwealth, or a seceded groups that, we don't know all that. I would not jump on that, but that is on the books. I am very surprised since the war took place that Tigray and TPLF has not declared its intent of secession. They have really held back on that. If anybody else experienced what they have experienced, they would announce that a secession, because in 1991, when they were coming, they, gave a chance for the unification. Some people argue that they had the goal, but from the literature that I read, TPLF never said we will secede. They will always advocated for a united with a federal system, which is what they structured. Would they succeed? If they succeed, what is their next program? We don't know. What we do know is that they cannot sell to the Tigrawa people an Ethiopia that's united the way it is. In the same way, the Oromo cannot be sold on the idea of an imperial Ethiopia. It cannot. As a matter of fact, the Big Bang will not come from Tigray. The Big Bang that may change Ethiopia will come from a united force or power of Tigray and Oromia. And that will also bring into the pool of the resistance and the forces of change Somalis, Sidamas, Gumus. You have to understand that all these people have grown up for the last 30 years in an imperfect federal system. They were waiting for a perfect federal system. And to take them back would just result in another vicious war. Ultimately, Addis Ababa will burn in that war, in my opinion.
That is a great ending for our show today, Faisal Roble. It was a very great pleasure of mine to have. I hope our first discussion, not our last discussion on this issue and other issues of Ethiopia and on the Horn. So thank you so much for coming to my show today.
Thank you, Getachew. I'm very much happy to have been with you. And as they say, a luta continua.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Getachew.
Dear viewers, this was the show on UMD Media with Faisal Roble, principal planner for the city of Los Angeles and a very knowledgeable expertise, I must say, on the Horn of Africa. Please, if you are following us on Facebook or YouTube, share, like, and subscribe so that many could benefit from this insightful conversation. Your host was Gita Chasafa. Bye for now.